Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Manju Hegde, CEO, Uhnder. Manju, welcome to the podcast.
Very happy to be here.
Excited to have you here because radar is an exciting emerging field. It goes way back in history to World War II, but you're doing something that's remarkably special in the self-driving car industry with radar. But before we get into that, I want to not go back as far as World War II, but I want to go back to 2016 because on July 28, 2016, you gave a talk at the University of Michigan College of Engineering called When We Should Trust Self-Driving Cars. It was a really well done talk. Why did you give it?
Well, the reason is I was invited to, and it's in keeping up with a wonderful academic tradition, that of honoring your professor before his retirement. They usually do that with a symposium by the ex-students, and typically it's the doctoral students, and I was one of them. And I particularly like that tradition because it's almost exactly the same as the Indian tradition. You know, India had this tradition where you learn from a guru. You spend 12 to 15 years with a guru and you learn, and especially in old India, you learn verbally. There was no written communication. And of course, the guru was really important. And I like this tradition because it's very similar to that, honoring your teacher. Now, while giving that talk, I was relatively new to automated driving and automotive in general. And so I had a fresh view of that. And so I had a lot of turmoil in naming that talk. And in fact, if you've seen the talk, I spent the first 5 minutes sharing with the audience the turmoil in naming it. I mean, I kind of made it tongue in cheek and different adverbs. But I think that effort was worth it because I like that name. The name, in fact, was Self-Driving Cars. When can you trust them? Now, trust is a very important word. And trust, like I said in the talk, if you talk to your girlfriend or your wife and you say, "Can I trust you?" that immediately creates a tension. And I wanted that tension to come out in the talk about, the consumer and what the industry is doing in trying to push self-driving cars onto the market. And if I had to succinctly describe the current saga, Waymo, Cruise, Motional, all trying to come out with self-driving cars, the best way to describe when they will be successful is when people start trusting them. Trust is important. Trust is, in fact, critical. And for instance, today, I myself, I would not be trusting a self-driving car in terms of walking in front of it because I don't know, it's I still feel a little, when I feel comfortable, and in fact, when a lot of people feel comfortable about that, and of course feel comfortable sitting in it, then you know that self-driving cars are not far away. That to me is why I like that title. And I think that's the reason why I put that in, because I wanted to make a talk which was very punchy, but also valuable for that audience then.
When you watch the video, which is available on YouTube, and it zooms out at points and it shows the classroom, the audience was engaged. You did a really good job of engaging the audience, that you had thought-provoking things. And I found that you put a lot of fun humor in there. So you were giving thought-provoking, a little humor. So you really kept the engagement of the audience, which is absolutely critical. And you mentioned trust. Trust is absolutely critical for autonomous vehicles. There's a lot of talk from the industry. We must build trust. We must build trust. You're in the middle of the industry building a critical component. In your opinion, how do we build that trust?
It's a $1 trillion question. I have some ideas because I think the way they're doing it right now is not the best. And I think it's partly because there are many constituencies who want to get self-driving cars on the road. And for instance, investors who have invested in all the self-driving startups, they want self-driving cars to come out fast. Then the big tech companies like Google and Waymo and Argo, they wanted to come. And the OEMs in the beginning weren't fully engaged, but now I think every OEM has a level for engagement. So there's definitely, let's get it out fast because it's expensive to keep doing research. Now, As a result, you've got different people giving different kinds of predictions. So the first thing, if you want to build trust, is you know go start making small predictions that are then delivered. And they've already, to some extent, they failed that, because when I gave that talk in 2016, the CEO of Nissan was saying we would have cars in self-driving cars by 2020, and this is the CEO of Nissan, which is a traditional company. It's not one of the newfangled companies. And then, of course, there's a famous quote by Chris Urmson that I hope my 16-year-old son doesn't need a driver's license. Again, very optimistic. So my point is, first of all, lower expectations. This is a very well-known thing. It's just that when there's so many people hankering to get it out there, they've ignored that as an industry. And the second thing is that we now know that self-driving is that standard thing. The first 99% is not that hard. The last 1% is very hard. In fact, the last 1% is like 90%. There's this famous quote there. That's what we know now. So what I think is important, and again, my idea is that you need to make small expectations. For instance, take level 3. Level 3 is to me a very good intermediate stage. And level 3, if you notice, the OEMs in the beginning, I'd say about 5 years ago, they said, how is level 3 going to work? Because the human is texting or watching something, and suddenly we give him the beep beep in 15 seconds and he has to take control of the car. And humans are not good at switching context, which is true. But the reason, I think one of the reasons, and I think Junko Yoshida, she says it in a report, is saying now they're looking at it from their point of view. They're saying, well, level 3 means you're doing level 4 for 15 seconds. That's a lot easier, because in 15 seconds, the world, there's a probability. It's unlikely some huge thing will happen. So it's less risky. But my point is, that is a good segue, because if you tell consumers you're still in charge, level 3, the ultimately the human is in charge. It's not like level 4. There's that quantum leap isn't there. So then if they do that, then we get used to that. Oh, for 15 seconds, and then we know we have to take charge. So by repeating and delivering a good experience during those 15 seconds or maybe 20 seconds, people will start trusting it. Because right now we're asking people to make the leap from you're in charge to, oh, okay, you can abandon it. And we don't know if we can trust machines with such dangerous big 2,000 pound things that move at 70 miles per hour. I think that's important, that it's a slow accumulation. Trust is never done. You never trust anybody in a jiff. And if you do, then you're imprudent. You always trust people. What do you say? I know him for so long. He's always done. That's how you say trust. The same thing with self-driving cars. We got to get to that. Of course, commercially, people want to put a date and say it'll happen. But we've shown, the big companies are so often that even they're wrong, even conservative as they are. So I think we really need to re-examine that, and maybe an industry body, or maybe even a regulatory body. And I hate saying that because that seems like it's against innovation. They need to channel this so that we don't have these various constituencies making claims which then can't be kept, because consumers hear all this. And then there's the second aspect. So this is about pure self-driving. The other aspect is, as a consumer, the recent reports on ADAS are not great. The AAA study in 2019 was awful. They were missing things like a pedestrian at 15 miles per hour. And this is features that you paid for, that you think, this is, not the new technology. New technology is fully autonomous car. But the reports have been bad on ADAS. And then recently in January 2022 of this year, they found again it's improved, but still they're not delivering what you'd expect from AEB. And that's so. My point is, one is that the industry should figure out a way how to reduce expectations. But the second thing is, on ADAS, which is available today, which we are paying for, they should up the act, and that they can fix. They're just not. They haven't invested enough. They haven't been regular tests, and that is going to change, because NHTSA, IHS, European NCAP, they're all upping the testing of ADAS features. So no longer can a car company say, well, we've got AEB, and they continue to miss simple use cases. So a combination of these two things will certainly help trust, but trust is a thing that you have to earn slowly. It cannot be accelerated. You are in the spotlight. Everything you say, you'll be held accountable for, and you have to do it for a certain duration of time.
If you look at earning something slowly, it's a great analogy to a reputation. It takes you a lifetime to build a great reputation and 1 minute to destroy it if you do something silly or improper, for example. Stepping into the level 3 debate, do you see the need for driver monitoring where if you're going to have a level 3 vehicle, say, operating on the highway on a 200-mile, 300-mile distance, ensuring that there's driver monitoring so that the driver doesn't get drowsy or completely distracted over that long period of a drive?
I think the two things here, will it really be effective? I think it may. But more importantly, it's the perception that the car company feels that they're going to put something somewhat risky, let's say, and they feel the need to do that. It's just the perception that they're doing that means they're attentive to that. That perception is valuable. There's something which you do, the perception is stronger than the reality. I think this is one of those instances. But also because, the driver can still do what he does. Like, there's this thing about level 2, you got to keep touching the steering wheel. So you can look somewhere and keep touching the steering wheel. But the fact that it's there is an indication that the car companies thought about it. So the better thought out it is, the more it'll help those people who sit in those cars to trust. And trust in technology is not just an individual trust. Like, you trust technology because the standard approach, right? Your peers are telling you that, and then the savants are telling you that. So trust will go across the community. So it can start. I have a level 3 car and I say my experience is great, and then of course all the people who trust my judgment will build that, so they start trusting it. So that's why I think it's important.
What role does perception play? And I'll give you some examples. There's big Hollywood blockbuster movies such as iRobot. They have self-driving cars in them. There's TV shows such as Upload, self-driving cars. And then there's kids' cartoons. My daughter's watching Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. There's a show called Mickey and the Roadster Racers. And Goofy, Mickey, and Minnie, and Donald, they're racing a self-driving car. And so it's becoming more and more mainstream. What role do you think that's playing in setting the expectations?
I think as long as the leaders in the industry don't tell the public to expect it soon, it's really the soonness that's an issue. Because ultimately, I believe all those things will be met, but they won't be met by 2022 or 2023 or even 2025. So that is the goal, because you want the vision. The vision is important, but if you tell them a specific date and you don't deliver, then they lose trust. So as long as there is a vision, but you say that that's hard, and it is. We know that it's hard now. We know it's actually better than, say, 5 years ago. How hard it is, because we were making tremendous progress and we've made tremendous progress, but there's still the last 1%. Those corner cases are not easy, and now we know that. So we should just set expectations, keep delivering. For instance, I believe that we'll get fusion as a source of energy. It's a vision. It's probably 30 years out. But nobody's promising me that in 5 years, and nobody, because they know better than that. But in self-driving cars, we somehow abandoned that kind of normal prudence that we have in technology, and we said, oh, we started giving dates. The earliest date was 2018. My main this thing is that if industry leaders start playing this game, very quickly, at some point, the public will say, no, it's not going to happen.
The public will tune out, which will have a negative effect, and then regulators will start asking a lot of questions. You're very right about setting the expectations. There's two camps to set it for. You set it for policymakers and for the public. And you're sitting there as CEO of Uhnder. You clearly understand how to properly set expectations. I love the tagline for your company, Under the Radar, how you came up with the name Uhnder. As a CEO, how are you properly setting expectations for the technology that you are developing?
Yeah, it's actually very related to the entire theme of this conversation, because everybody who talks to us says, oh, you're going to make self-driving cars possible. I said, no, our first goal is improving ADAS, because first of all, it's somewhat self-serving, because the revenue and the volume and the scale today is all in ADAS, in traditional cars. Now, that's not the sexy part. The sexy part is, of course, we want to get into the self-driving car. But I tell them, no, we are not. Of course, we can work there, but we are much more interested in this. So also for our own employees, they all want to be on a self-driving car, because that's the measure of your performance and the future. So I think that's not too hard, because ultimately, as a startup, revenue rules. Right now we are almost done with our development. Our product is about to be automotive qualified in days, and that's a huge milestone. And so now we can be in production cars. In fact, we are going to be in a production car, which is one car that's publicly known. That's the Fisker, coming out in November 17th, and that's right now, at least for our employees and our partners, that's important. But of course, we know that we want to be in self-driving cars, and we would love for them to be happening sooner. But I think it has to happen correctly. Otherwise, we kind of miss the pot of gold completely. And so I think we are working with all the level 4 guys, and we'll get into the pilots, and we want them to go at a deliberate pace which they can sustain and they can deliver on. And I think these things are long term. Anything in automotive is long term. I mean, when you read how long it took a simple thing like seat belts to become standard in automotive, you'll be shocked. I did research on that. It's not, seat belt is a no brainer. You think in 5 years, what's the problem? No, it took 25 years.
You said the line as a startup, revenue rules. More startups should have that same attitude and philosophy. Why have you adapted the revenue rules philosophy?
There are two reasons which are specific to us. We are a semiconductor company, and they've somehow gone out of fashion in Silicon Valley, come into fashion in other remote places like Beijing and Bangalore, and somewhat in Austin, but still not in that scale. And semiconductor companies, by definition, are capital intensive. So you have to spend a lot of money, and everybody expects that. Now, add to that, our primary market is automotive. And as you know, in automotive, the design cycles are long. We can win something in it take 3 years. When you compound those two things together, every investor that we've talked to, we've explained that. Now, we have been working on this for 6 years, or nearly 7 now. But we finished our development, and we've made milestones very stealthily. We haven't been announcing this and that, but we are, as I said, days from being automotive qualified, which is the single biggest milestone for a semiconductor company in automotive. I mean, the only other ones are the big guys, TI, Infineon, NXP. There is no other startup or a chip startup that's even close to that. Now, we actually, the name Under the Radar, which meant not and nobody knowing about it. I would say that now we want to be on everybody's radar. I mean, especially our customers and partners, because we want to start marketing the capability that digital radar brings to ADAS. That's important for us, and we are getting tremendous traction with OEMs and tier ones. But at some point we'll try to educate the consumer, and a consumer we need to attend to, because I think that the one way or one approach to fixing the ADAS problems, which the AAA and IHS have noted, is to create consumer demand for that. I mean, this is like what I think in the 70s or the 80s, if you remember Ralph Nader, I think when the seatbelt and the rollover discussion was going on, he basically inducted consumers. He wrote that book, Unsafe at Any Speed, because the OEMs were trying to oppose it because it was costing. They didn't think consumers cared about safety. And of course, I think they do, but the OEMs have to be told that. I think the OEMs are much more convinced right now, but as a combination of regulatory oversight, with better testing and consumer demand and consumer outcry, I think it'll happen. So that's the reason we would go to consumers. But our main focus in marketing is the tier ones, the OEMs, and our partners.
Consumers care about safety. Scientists care about safety. And I want to go in the Wayback Machine here for you, because the first practical radar system was produced in 1935 by Sir Robert Watson Watt. It was used in World War II in 1939 to detect aggressors on air and sea. That breakthrough saved a lot of lives, had a very positive safety impact. The technology that you're developing will save a lot of lives and have a very positive safety impact. Being in the trenches, building the technology you're building, how has radar evolved since World War II?
Wow, that would be a very long answer. Let me summarize it by showing you the endpoints. I think you're talking about the chain home network that the British built, and they built it along the coastline that faced Europe, because this was in preparation for the Battle of Britain, and the Germans were coming from France and from the Netherlands, etc. And those were in the megahertz. So the towers were, meaning lower frequency than today's radars, which means the wavelengths were larger, which means the antennas had to be larger. And these were tall, almost the size of microwave towers today, the tall towers. And they worked wonderfully because I read an analysis of a couple of years ago. The size of the RAF, the Royal Air Force, was multiplied by three because of these radars, because they could be going quickly because the range of these towers, they could see German aircraft approaching, inland France, you know, and so they could then rush their limited fighter planes to that correct spot, and then they could, if the Germans came from some other, they didn't have to search. The radar searched for them, and that's what gave them a 3x multiplier. And then, of course, when the US joined in, then the total armament production went up. So it was critical, as you said. Now, if I look at the two things which have occurred, two macro things which have greatly improved radar, it's the progress in electronics. Because remember, in the Second World War, the integrated circuit was not there yet, so that was a huge advance. And then the progress in communications, that's more recent. I would say that progress. So I'd say from the 1940s to say the 1990s, it was the tremendous increase in electronics. The microprocessor, everything, all the amplifiers got made smaller, less power, and then we could go higher frequencies. Higher frequencies meant the antenna became smaller. Higher frequencies meant the objects that were detectable became smaller, because what the original radar was intended to do was identify a big metal object, a bomber, flying at high speeds, and built out of, it was big, it was metallic, and it was flying at high speeds, all things which are relatively easy for radar. But when we come to automotive, it's small objects, something, say 3 inches, can still be damaging. It's not moving that fast, and it may not be made of metal because you got to put humans in that mix. So those things have to change. So one way to change them is we had to have frequency, higher frequency, and they went from three orders of magnitude, from megahertz to gigahertz. I think those were 20 megahertz then. Today, automotive radar 76 gigahertz. Obviously, huge impact. And now with 76 gigahertz, the wavelength is 3.75 millimeters. So we can see objects about that size, right? Then the power, that was 350 kilowatts, because they needed to detect planes at 120 miles per hour. Luckily, in automotive, you need to detect something maybe 400, 500 meters, rarely more than that. Maybe in trucking, it can be 1,000 meters. But because these things are so small and you don't have 350 kilowatts, in fact, our chip runs at 8 to 9 watts when it's operational, and in that we have to detect these thousands of objects of this small size up to say 300, 400 meters, and that's again the improvement in power electronics. The second thing is, so those were the electronics aspects, and of course cost. When you make things as small chips, as you know, a chip is like say 100 square millimeters, and it's at 28 nanometers. 10 to 20 to $30, something there. Those were, you don't want to know the cost of those radar. Now, let me come to the second aspect, the communication aspect, because this applies to, in particular, to digital radar, which is what we are pioneering. So if you look at the communications industry in, say, early 90s, radar was at its inception. And in some sense, the mobile phones were the inception. But if you look at the progress in the last 30 years, mobile phones, there were about, say, 50 million worldwide in 1990. Radars, there were much fewer. But now what have mobile phones done? They're about per year, about 1.5 to 2 billion sold per year. So the installed base is humongous. Radars have gone to about 10% attach rate in cars, but they'll be going up much. But the communications progress has been tremendous, and they have spurred some huge technology improvements. The geometry of the semiconductors has gone down. Right? Apple now uses 5 nanometers. TSMC has announced 3 nanometers. Secondly, the signal processing techniques have been tremendous. MIMO has come in. All kinds of signal processing filters have come in. Then the packaging technology has improved. We've got wafer scale packaging. Then the coding has improved tremendously. Coding, in fact, the advances in coding and communications have helped other industries. Now, the digital radar that we are building takes advantage of all these technologies. For instance, the first chip, the one that's going to be qualified in some days, is the lowest node of any radar chip. We are at 16 nanometers, not as advanced as the 5 nanometers that Apple has put into the latest phones, but far advanced of any other guy. Because when we go digital, you want to use a lower node. You can put more logic in. We are using 3D waveguide antennas. Communication that we're using for the 20 years is the first time it's coming into automotive radar. And that's really valuable because it saves on the power loss in antennas, gives us bigger distance. We use coding like no other radar. I mean, analog radars can't use coding. Digital radars use coding. So we are using techniques used by Qualcomm and others in CDMA. We are using wafer scale packaging. I told you the 60 nanometers, that's for the DSP portion of our radar. The RF portion of our radar is in 28 nanometers. So we have the wafer scale packaging, again, used by communications guys. We are introducing into automotive. So the last 30 years, the advantages have been brought by the tremendous scale at which communication has gone up. And the last thing I want to point out is one of the big advantages of digital radar is to program something, it has to be digital. So when we have a digital radar, we sometimes call it a software defined radar because that's what it is. It gives our customers the ability to customize their solution so they're not all competing with the same radar, because radar, there are many different ways you can use it. If you want to put radar on a trucking application in the highways, you want to do differently than if you want to do a radar on a motorcycle, or if you want to do radar for little robots. So this allows them to program the same chip in multiple different ways according to how they see fit. In fact, we give them the software and a processor just for their use so that they can actually program the chip to do that. And that's, I think, the progress I would say. We went from the big military radars to something which is using all the technologies that have come through in electronics and communications, but pricing it at a price that's it can be mass produced in cars, because cars are consumer goods. Price is critical. Power, because cars cannot afford too much power. Electric cars are even more sensitive to power. And form factor, because you can't have ugly radars on a car, because people buy cars like other consumer goods for their style. I mean, in fact, if you talk to a car company, you'll never realize the function because they're all talking about how good it looks and how sleek it is and it drives. But the safety, they want it hidden. Radars are always hidden. And it's not good for engineering, but it's great for design. And we have to accommodate that. And we can with the new technologies.
How do you accommodate building it into the design? Is it the breakthroughs in the technologies that you've developed?
That is using special materials. For instance, you never see radars you won't see radars on cars. In the old cars, the radar was, you could always see that. You could see the shape because it was outside the car. Now they're integrated into the bumper, behind the fascia, sometimes behind the emblem. And the typical thing they provide is cooling problems, thermal problems. In fact, radars are sometimes put in the worst possible place inside a bumper, surrounded by something like styrofoam. Think about how much of a cooling. That's why power is important, because you do not want moving parts. You want passive cooling. You cannot have active cooling, and that's a challenge because to see far, you got to generate enough power to transmit it out. But if you have too much power, then there's a thermal issue, and that's where one of the advantages of digital radar, we can use the phase. We are phase modulated. We can use the phase and do something called MIMO. Multiple output is a sophisticated signal processing technique from communication which we borrowed, and greatly increases the power on target. In fact, there is no other radar with as much power on target. Yet, as I told you, it's only 9 watts in operation.
That's really impressive. I like what you're building with digital radar. To level set here, a lot of consumers listening to this, they have a vehicle and it has radar on it. What are the benefits and shortfalls of traditional radar that's currently found on vehicles today?
Sure. I think analog radars came up, in the early 90s. In fact, one of the guys who worked on the first automotive radars, Steve Allen, he works for us. He had a very illustrious career. He became chief radar scientist at Aptiv, the biggest radar supplier in the world. And he retired, and then he started working for us because he said, "Oh, you guys are doing something really interesting. I've always wanted to work on a digital radar." So we know something about analog radar. The genesis of analog radar was 2 convenience features, which I'm sure you know about. One is called blind spot detection. The other is called adaptive cruise control. Now, if you think about the technology problem, let me take adaptive cruise control. The technology problem in adaptive cruise control is you want to follow a truck or an SUV or a car right in front of you, what we call in radar term bore sight. Now, if you know anything about radars, you know the strongest signal strength is in the middle, that bore sight. And metal is the best radar reflector. So, in terms of today's technology, that's I won't trivialize it, but it's easy. Now, let's take blind spot detection. What do you want to do there? You want to detect a car, an SUV, or a motorcycle, all metallic objects moving at a high speed. And speed is easy for radars because that's what radars do, Doppler. So these are both relatively easy cases, and they've done a good job solving them. Now, when you come to safety critical things, what is the single feature that comes to mind? Automatic emergency braking. That's a safety critical feature. Now, in automatic emergency braking, where are the sources of hazards? It's these damn people, as a driver might say. Suddenly, a child might dart out from behind a parked car. Now, there, the child is coming from the fringes of your field of view. That's where the radar signal is weakest. And then a child is not metallic, a child is organic. And so that's both of them not great for radar, traditional radar. So that's why digital radar has some of these advantages. So let me go through four of these advantages in particular because these are important. So the child coming out from behind a parked car, that's what we call contrast. Analog radar, that's a known problem of analog radar. And the AAA study in 2019, actually, this is the test that they did. A child dummy coming out from behind two parked cars. All the radars failed 100% of the time. In digital radar, we use a code from CDMA and we do the ranging using something called autocorrelation. It's well known in communication. What that does is when you completely sync the transmitted code and the received code, and we are doing that really fast in the order of microseconds, you get a spike. So you get a spike for the car, a big spike, and then there's some gap and you get a small spike for the child next to it. But we see both spikes, so we see that they're two objects. So now I'm going to digress so that I can continue this discussion. All the radars, cameras, and lidars, the principle of how they ensure safety is as follows. They have a field of view. They detect dynamic and static objects. It's the dynamic objects that provide a hazard because they can come into your trajectory. So you have to track them. Tracking them means predicting where that object will be when your vehicle gets close to them. It's tracking that makes radars, cameras, and lidars a safety sensors. Now, coming back to the child next to the parked car, if the radar doesn't see the child, it's not going to track it. Analog radar, therefore, miss that. That's why all those analog radars in the AAA study miss them. We can see the child and the car. We track both. There's a little more compute required, and we've provided adequate compute for that, but we are tracking both. So that's clearly a safety critical feature. That's one of we call that contrast. In fact, our contrast is 30 times better than any analog radar. Now let me come to resolution. Resolution is, in radar terms, means disambiguating two objects which are close to each other. For instance, again, I'm driving the car and 100 meters out, there are two pedestrians talking to each other, standing very close. If they're close enough, the angle subtended by them is small. So analog radars typically have resolution issues. In fact, until 2 years ago, your radar was resolution of only 5 to 10 degrees, which means even if two people were 50 meters apart at 100, you would see them as one. Our resolution is much, much better. We have 16 times better resolution because we measured that. So now, if I have two pedestrians and if they're situated at a certain proximity, the analog radars will see them as one, and it'll be a random thing whether they track. Maybe one pedestrian walks towards the road, the other one walks towards the building, so they may track one or the other. We detect both, so we track both. So we will in particular know that one pedestrian is walking towards the road. So resolution is a very safety critical feature. We are 16 times better. Now the third one is power on target. Remember I told you that because we have multiple transmitters and we have codes, we combine the power, we have 24 times more power on target. Where does that help? Here is a concrete example. One of the OEMs asked us, can you detect a tire without a metal rim on the road at more than 120 meters? That's very important for level 3 because level 3 highway autopilot, You want to detect those small objects on the road because hitting a tire at 70 miles per hour is not a fun experience and obviously safety critical. We actually showed them we can detect tires at 230 meters. There is no other radar in the world that can detect 120. We have 24 times more power on target. So that's the third safety critical feature. The last one is becoming increasingly important and it'll become even more important. You'll start hearing about it. It's the interference problem. The OEMs have known about this, but nobody's done anything on this because there is no industry body which says we have to have interoperability between radars. That is particularly bad because what interference does is, let's say you have a radar which can detect a car at 250 meters, which is a good distance for safety. If a third car is coming on the other side of the road with this radar on, and by the way, European OEM we are working on did this test, so I'm telling you exactly what they did. That distance from 250 meters becomes 25 meters. That's clearly not enough. They repeated the same test with our sensor built with our radar. We hardly lose anything because we have an interference correcting capability because we've got codes. And secondly, we also put some filters, adaptive filters on the chip and which occur in the sensor that allows us to take out the interfering radar signal. The reason we can do that is digital radar has about 50 times more bandwidth than analog radar. It's the nature of the radar. So if we take out the radar, we lose about 2 to 2.5% of our signal, but that's not enough to greatly diminish our range. So that is particularly important. There is an IEEE working group, in fact, trying to see how to solve the interference problem. But in some sense, right now we are the only solution. So these are all safety critical, as I pointed out, and these are the unique aspects of digital radar.
What you described to me with operation of low power, the improved safety, this feature, what you're developing, digital radar, should become standard on every vehicle sold because the safety improvements and the positive impact on society.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be digital radar because, say, the IEEE group, they might come out with some impose a certain code, and so that you can, there are multiple ways. In fact, like on standard Ethernet, there's a protocol where you have to sense and avoid. So they will have they could have cooperated, but they have to solve the problem. The point is, we've solved the problem without requiring an industry agreement because in radar there is no body right now, and this is all at inception. And that could take 5-7 years. But we right now have a solution to interference. So that's going to be one of the big things we are marketing. Like I told you, we're going to start trying to be on everybody's radar. One of the reasons is because we want everybody to understand the interference issue. OEMs do understand it, but we're not going to convert them in a week. But by showing them the results, by showing them, and there's a strong industry groups working on this. So I think we're very optimistic about that helping us to greatly increase our penetration into the ADAS system.
You're starting there on your revenue rules philosophy. The new Fisker Ocean SUV is going to feature Uhnder's 4D digital imaging radar as part of their Fisker intelligent pilot system. Well done on that. How did the relationship with Hendrik Fisker first come about that's going to allow you to put your technology in the market and validate everything?
Yeah, I think if you followed Hendrik Fisker's career, he's kind of like the Frank Lloyd Wright of automotive design. He likes to, Frank Lloyd Wright was famous for integrating his houses with the environment, like falling water. He didn't disturb the waterfall. The waterfall is right under the house. So I think Hendrik is like that. He wants to take trends in automotive and integrate them into a great design. And he's done that with the Fisker Ocean. For instance, if you look at, there's a solar panel on the roof, right? It's sustainable materials. I think when they talk about the materials they use, it's recycled paper. It's, for the interior. So, but on the safety, he looked at the technologies, and we were marketing to investors and to the technology press and to Magna in particular. So since he was working with Magna, he heard about digital radar and its advantages. He said, I need that because even if we look at his battery, in his battery, he's got a pretty high range. It's 350 meters. He's using a very special battery. So in things which help sustainability, the environment, or automation, he's taken it to a slightly higher level. So it fit in with his design philosophy. That's, I think, the reason they picked us.
It's a well-documented philosophy. I really like your Frank Lloyd Wright analogy there. You're spot on with that because the vehicle will blend into the environment, and it's also very good for the environment from the way it's developed. So you have Fisker going. That's public. What you're describing seems like there must be other OEMs knocking on your door. Are there other OEM partnerships coming in the future?
There are several, but I think none of them right now. They haven't given us permission to talk about them. Because the automotive industry, they don't like to say what vendor they're using because they feel the vendor gets undue power. Fisker is different because he's also from a small company environment, so he's actually marketing digital radar in a way I've never seen radar marketed to the consumer, and we are totally in sync with that. In fact, we would love other OEMs to do that. It'll take a little time. These are traditional companies, humongous companies, but we are doing well with other OEMs. And as I said, we are upping our marketing game to be on everybody's radar. And I think most of the OEMs have heard about us now and have a pretty good opinion of us.
Once the reviews come in for the Ocean, consumers start raving about the ADAS suite. Then you're going to get a lot more knocks on your door and a lot more phone calls. And being based in Austin, there's a lot of technology companies in there, so you never know who's going to knock on your door there.
Yeah, but I think the knocking on the doors is occurring already. It's because it's not just, Fisker will be a proof. Right now we've shown them, but we are not in a large scale in production cars on the road. So Fisker is very important. But remember, NHTSA has the NCAP RFC, which just concluded for comments on June 8th. And they are saying that we need to put more tests. And a lot of those tests will be radar because some of the tests are at night. They can't be done just with cameras. So it's not just Fisker is one example, but there's a whole movement because people are now, if you're going to promise safety in ADAS, the consumers and the government are going to demand, let's make sure that it's there because people are paying for it. And I think that's going to help us. And not just us, it's going to help the entire industry because, the people who build cameras, everybody who's using a car which says AB expects a certain minimum performance. And I think that's going to happen and that will certainly help the industry and us.
It goes from show me to tell me to prove it. That's the consumers are going to want to show and document that you prove it. How does 4D radar work in adverse conditions such as fog, snow? Does it work well or how does it work?
It works. All radar, one of the big use cases for radar is that unlike the other two safety sensors, LiDAR and camera, we are based in 76 to 81 gigahertz, which works well in snow, fog, rain. In fact, the performance degradation is very marginal. But as you know, camera, LiDAR, they don't work well in fog, rain, and snow. Analog radar and digital radar, we work in the same frequency, so the same physics applies to us. So on that context, we're no better than analog radar, no worse. But all radar is good in snow, rain, and fog.
I want to take it even further because each Uhnder 4D digital imaging radar chip features 12 transmitters and 16 receivers, enabling 192 virtual radar channels. Why?
Yeah, it was that decision probably took 6 months of engineering work. It's ultimately, it comes to the fact that, the more, if you have a radar with MIMO and the transmitter and the receiver are synchronized, then they look like the product channel, meaning 12 transmitters and 16 receivers is 192 channels. And in all radars, the more channels you have, the better the resolution. And remember what I said earlier, resolution is a very important safety critical feature. So we wanted the highest resolution. But then we are working in automotive. And automotive is a very cost conscious. If you were building this for the military, we probably have 10,000 channels, by the way, because they would pay for it. But, Magna, who's our partner, was very important in this because they knew automotive really well. We were a startup. They said, you better get this cost target. So what we did is we looked at the technology we were using, 28 and 16 nanometers, and you can do engineering analysis to find out how to reach the cost target, how much die area you can use. So what we did is we put the largest number of channels we could with the power, area, and cost targets, because the more we had, the better. By the way, we definitely hit a nerve there because every OEM, every tier one, we've been talking to OEMs since 2018. So, and the word gets around, and we've been presenting at technical conferences that we got 192. We have a paper. Every tier one now has a 192 channel radar, except that they do it with 5 chips because there's no chip that can accommodate. So they have to consume more power. It's more expensive. It's more complex a design, but the 192 has become like an industry standard, and I think we can fairly credibly claim reason for doing that is us, because we've been promoting that. And even if we don't win some OEMs and there's a 192 channel data that wins it, I think we'll feel good because we probably saved some lives on with that radar too.
On the radar front, you have a partnership with Spartan Radar. What's the partnership about? How will you complement what you're already building?
Yeah, Spartan Radar, if you've talked to them, and I mean, I don't claim to know their business model well, but they want to be a software company in the radar space. And there's a very good market for them. In fact, the most recent conversations I've had with them is they want to be like the software OS, because building an operating system is very important, right? Microsoft is as big as it is because it saw that opportunity with the PC space, and these guys are seeing the opportunity in the radar space because every car is going to have multiple radars. The Fisker car coming out is five. There are many other cars with 3 to 5. So they're building software around it, and they're also building. They've got some special IP on certain software features. You can improve the resolution of radars. As I said, the resolution depends on the number of channels, but you can even improve it so that with clever software, you can take a certain number of channels and improve upon it. And Spartan has some of that IP. So they look at us as the premier hardware company. We're building chips, we're building even sensors, and they're doing the software. So they want to work with the top guys in the industry, and these are radar experts. They came from defense and the autonomous cars, so they know the radar. I think they have come from Boeing and Raytheon and TU Simple. So these guys recognize that we weren't just talking PowerPoint; we had real substance, and so we started working with them last year. So and we recognize that they have great radar expertise. So we did a couple of projects together, and then they said, "Hey, we want to create an OS, and your radar is software defined because it's so programmed, it's digital. So isn't that a good match?" And we said, yeah. I mean, because we don't want to invest that much in software. We're a hardware company. We have some software which allows people access to the features, but we don't have the software vision they do. That's the reason why it's a very good match and compelling. But usually you don't want two startups to collaborate because two startups is two people with vision. This is one of the rare ones where it makes sense because they're so software focused and we are so hardware chip focused, and both of us are leading edge.
When two great companies come together, special things happen. I can't wait to see what happens in the future between Uhnder and Spartan. Something good's cooking there. And in your opinion, how do you see the 4D digital radar market maturing?
Well, the good thing, although we call it digital radar, the installation, the placement is absolutely no different. I mean, we go into the same slots which analog radar goes into. It's just that, and we give the API is the same. So to the perception engineer in the tier one of the OEM, he's just getting more data. He's seeing those two pedestrians instead of the one. He's seeing the child, which he didn't see before. So he's got to do, the back end of the software. It's the same software. It just does more processing. So the way we are trying to get into the market is every time a new platform opens up, and in automotive, there's typically about 20 new platforms a year. So that's why we are working with several OEMs. We are trying to get onto the next platform. Of course, for them, any new technology is something that they like, but they're always very careful to adopt it. They want tremendous validation. And as you pointed out, the Fisker is a great validation because they say, oh, it's on the road, it's doing all this, and the reviews will be important. But the technology, we've been working with several of these OEM for several years. I mean, some of them since 2018. So it's a very slow adoption. And as a consumer, I feel good about that. That means they're really testing before they deploy. Good. But at this point, there is a lot of things coming together. There is regulators coming together. There is the insurance industry coming here. Then there is even the tier ones are saying, you need 192 channel radars, and we give to them natively. So all these things are helping us. So the deployment will be platform by platform in deploying in level 2 plus. Fisker is a level 2 plus. Most of our other engagements are level 2 plus or level 2 plus plus. I think we got one or two L3 engagements. So this is, like I told you, to build trust with the OEMs also, we have to do it incrementally, make sure we deliver what we promise and not try to jump the gun. And then the one place which is helping us is the level 4 guys. Everybody looks to the level 4 guys as, wow, these guys, if they really get their act together and they're deployed, that'll be a tremendous leap in safety. So, and we are working with a number of the level 4 guys. So they are, I look at them as marketing to the OEMs, but our main target right now, as I told you, revenue rules, is the OEM, because that's where the scale is.
I like how throughout this conversation, you're trying to properly set the expectations. Today, you gave a master class in radar, Manju, so thank you so much. I learned a lot about radar, and as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
Yeah, and this is something I'm passionate about, and you may have sensed some of the passion in 2016, but the 6 years since then have just made me more passionate, because in some ways I'm kind of incensed that the electronics is at a stage and communication at a stage where we can definitely start saving lives and impaired lives. It's not just fatalities. There's 1.2 million fatalities. There's probably 10x that in terms of limbs and injuries. And really, a lot of them can be. You don't need level 4 for that. ADAS can solve a lot of that, but not if you do lip service to it, say A, B, and you don't test the thing. So, I mean, normally I'm not in favor of regulations, but in this case, I think you need them. It's one of the few places where I really strongly support regulation. And I think, I mentioned Ralph Nader. I think, 50 years ago, he did a master job, and he had to go through a lot of difficulty. And if there's one thing I'd like, is we are kind of inured to the amount of damage and destruction that cars cause. Most of it is needless. I don't know the exact percentage. They say 90%, but even if it's 60%, there's no need for that, because electronics is vastly superior to humans if you do it right. And we have the technology, as I pointed out to you, all these use cases, people coming out from parked cars, motorcycles coming out from a crossroad, motorcycles splitting the lane. These are hazards, and a lot of accidents occur at night. Radar is really good at night, except that it's not tested today at night. So my point is, that's my, to your listeners, is be proactive. I mean, if consumers show outrage, the industry will listen. The industry just needs some motivation. I mean, they look at everything in dollars and cents, but if consumers start getting outraged, it will affect the dollars, it will affect the sensors they put, will affect the ADAS, and finally, it will reduce those impaired lives and those fatalities. So that, to me, is what I'm passionate about.
Your passion comes through because digital radar will make our roads safer. It will make society a safer place as we drive our vehicles going to and from school, to work, or on vacation. Because the future is bright, the future is autonomous, and the future is Uhnder. Manju, thank you so much for coming on the Road to Autonomy today.
Thank you very much, and I had fun with your questions. They were really on point, and the fact that you did some research, that was a 6 year ago talk. I mean, I liked it then, I'd forgotten about it, but you made me revisit it, and I was surprised that so many of those things are true, and they shouldn't be. They really shouldn't be true. I mean, we should have better ADAS right now.
Thank you for the kind words. You and the team at Uhnder are getting us on the road to better ADAS, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy, or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.